More and more people are walking away from religion not with anger or rebellion, but with quiet clarity. Some have spent years inside a belief system, only to feel something slowly change over time. Others never fully bought in to begin with. Either way, the trend is unmistakable. Across continents, languages, and age groups, belief in organized religion is declining. Sometimes gradually, sometimes all at once. But why is this happening now? Why is religion losing its grip in places where it once held absolute authority? And what's replacing it? The reasons are layered. There isn't just one answer. There's no single moment when belief breaks. It's often a mix of cultural shifts, access to information, evolving social norms, and personal experience. It's a gradual process of seeing the world with new eyes. Not through the lens of ancient scriptures, but through direct observation, reflection, and lived reality. Let's start with something simple: access to information. The internet didn't just change how we communicate, it changed what we're exposed to. In the past, religious institutions could control the narrative. If you had questions, you went to a priest, an imam, a rabbi. Now, if something doesn't sit right with you, you can check your phone. You can hear other perspectives instantly, many of them based on reason, evidence, and science rather than tradition or doctrine. This access breaks down the illusion of unanimity. People realize they're not alone in their doubts. That quiet, unsettling question they've had for years, someone else has it too. Maybe thousands of people do. That sense of being the only one who doesn't believe starts to dissolve. Doubt, once private and shameful, becomes a shared human experience. At the same time, education levels have increased in much of the world. Studies consistently show a strong correlation between higher education and lower religiosity. That doesn't mean smart people don't believe. It means that as people learn more about science, history, and philosophy, they're less likely to accept answers that are untestable or absolute. Religion has a hard time coexisting with complexity. It tends to offer fixed answers in a world that keeps raising new questions. That might have been enough in a time when survival was the main concern, when people needed comfort more than explanation. But in an age of satellite images, genetic sequencing, and quantum physics, those old certainties don't satisfy in the same way. Another factor, and this one's rarely discussed, is moral autonomy. More people want to decide for themselves what's right and wrong instead of outsourcing those decisions to a book or authority figure. They want ethics that evolve, not commandments set in stone. They see how dogmatic systems often defend harmful ideas that conflict with basic human rights, and they're no longer willing to look away just because it's sacred. For example, many grew up hearing that being gay or trans is wrong because it says so in a scripture. But when they meet real people from those communities, friends, co-workers, even family members, they feel the dissonance. They see that kindness, love, and dignity don't line up with ancient taboos. And slowly, they start to trust their own judgment more than the inherited one. This is also why younger generations are driving the shift. Gen Z and millennials are the least religious cohorts in recorded history. They're growing up in a world where diversity isn't just tolerated, it's expected. Where questioning authority isn't rebellion, it's curiosity. Where inclusion matters more than tradition. And where spirituality, if it exists at all, is something personal, not institutional. Now, it's important to say this. The decline of religion doesn't mean a decline in meaning or morality. That's a false assumption, and one that religions often promote to stay relevant. But meaning can come from many sources. Purpose can come from family, creativity, relationships, or the pursuit of knowledge. Morality can arise from empathy, reason, and the shared goal of reducing harm. You don't need a holy book to know that suffering is bad or that helping others is good. In fact, when you remove divine command from the equation, you're forced to think more deeply about your values. You can't just say, because God said so. You have to ask, what kind of world do we want to live in? What makes an action right or wrong? What does fairness really look like? That's not a loss, it's a gain. It's ethics with intention. There's also something else happening beneath the surface, a quiet fatigue. For many, religion isn't rejected in a single moment. It's simply worn out. The rituals feel empty, the sermons repetitive, the promises vague, and the fear-based language of hell, judgment, divine punishment starts to feel manipulative instead of motivating. Eventually, people just stop showing up, and the world doesn't fall apart. There's no thunderclap, no cosmic punishment. Life keeps going. Sometimes it even gets better, lighter, more honest. That's when something clicks. The belief wasn't holding things together, it was just holding you back. That might be why, in many surveys, the number of people who identify as nones, no religion, is growing faster than any single belief group. Not because they're angry or bitter, but because the story no longer fits. It's not that they've turned away from something sacred, it's that they've turned toward something real. But it's not just individual journeys, entire societies are shifting. In places like Scandinavia, the UK, South Korea, Japan, and parts of Canada, religion has already taken a back seat, not through force or revolution, but through quiet evolution. In these places, belief is often a private choice, not a public expectation. There's no social penalty for not believing, no need to pretend, and once that pressure disappears, so does a lot of the belief itself. Of course, not every place follows the same path. In some regions, religion is still deeply entwined with identity, politics, and law. It's used to control, to unify, to justify power structures. But even there, cracks are forming. Underground movements, anonymous communities, private doubts. They're harder to track, but they're growing. The internet has made it impossible to fully insulate a population from new ideas. There's another point worth exploring. Religion often promises certainty, but in practice, it delivers division. There are over 4,000 active religions in the world. Each claims to know the truth. Each has sacred texts, rules, rituals, and yet they can't all be right. The sheer number of conflicting beliefs makes it hard to hold any of them as absolute. And once you realize that, once you see religion as a human creation, not a divine revelation, the spell starts to break. You start to notice how beliefs mirror the culture they come from, how gods tend to look like the people who worship them, how customs reflect geography more than morality, and how stories evolve over time, just like myths, legends, and folklore always have. And here's the thing. Once that door opens, it's very hard to close. Once someone begins to see religion not as a revealed truth, but as a historical phenomenon, everything changes. It's not just about rejecting belief. It's about understanding belief. Where it comes from, why it persists, and how it shapes societies. This awareness can be liberating, but it's not always easy. Religion offers community, structure, tradition. Leaving it can feel like losing more than just belief. It can feel like losing a home. But more and more people are willing to make that trade. Not because they want to be rootless, but because they want to be honest. Honesty, that's really what this comes down to. The rise of irreligion is not about pride or ego or rebellion. It's about people choosing to live in alignment with what they actually believe. Even if it's uncertain, even if it's uncomfortable, even if it means walking away from something they were raised to hold sacred. And that choice, that willingness to stand in the unknown without leaning on dogma, is in a way its own kind of courage. But courage doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it's as quiet as not saying amen when everyone else does, or letting go of a belief you clung to for comfort, or admitting to yourself for the first time that you simply don't believe. And what's interesting is that this shift isn't just happening in traditionally secular countries. Even in deeply religious societies, the change is underway. Slower, more cautious, but still unmistakable. In countries like Brazil, India, and the United States, Religious identity is fading, especially among younger generations, and in many cases people aren't replacing religion with some new ideology, they're just learning to live without needing one. This isn't a rejection of meaning, but a reframing of it. When people leave religion, they don't lose the desire to connect, to understand, to be part of something bigger. They just stop outsourcing that meaning to a supernatural framework. That shift is psychological too. As we learn more about how the human brain works, how emotions, memory, and identity function, it becomes clearer that belief isn't purely a choice. It's shaped by environment, reinforcement, and the need to make sense of chaos. Religion has long offered that structure, but modern psychology can explain much of what religion once claimed as its own. For example, the feeling of being watched by a higher power, that's a cognitive bias, the agent detection system that helped early humans survive by assuming threats had intent. Or the deep emotional response to rituals, that's pattern recognition and emotional conditioning. Prayer can feel comforting, not because someone's listening, but because repetition, silence, and reflection activate the parasympathetic nervous system. Understanding the machinery behind belief doesn't make it meaningless. It makes it human. It takes religion down from the heavens and puts it back in the world, where it can be studied, questioned, and understood. There's also an economic dimension to all this. As countries become more prosperous and secure, religiosity tends to decline. When basic needs are met, healthcare, education, safety, people are less likely to turn to supernatural explanations or divine protection. This pattern is held true across cultures. Where there's more inequality and instability, religion tends to grow. Where people feel safe and empowered, belief becomes optional. So in a sense, the rise of secular thinking isn't just intellectual, it's material. It reflects real-world improvements in quality of life. When people feel more in control of their lives, they don't feel the same urgency to place that control in a higher power. That's not to say religion only thrives in hardship. That would be too simplistic. But it does seem that when society offers more reliable systems of support, people are less dependent on spiritual ones. There's a reason why Northern Europe has some of the lowest levels of belief and the highest standards of living. It's not coincidence, it's correlation. These societies didn't abandon religion overnight, they simply built systems that could meet human needs more consistently than faith ever did. There's also a growing discomfort with religious institutions themselves. The scandals, the cover-ups, the political entanglements. These aren't isolated failures, they're structural. When organizations claim moral authority but consistently fall short of it, people begin to ask hard questions. And increasingly, the answers they find aren't religious ones. Clergy abuse scandals in the Catholic Church. Religious extremism justified in the name of sacred texts. Televangelists amassing personal fortunes while preaching humility. These contradictions push people away, not just from institutions, but from the belief systems that protect them. And even where institutions behave ethically, the foundational claims often don't hold up under scrutiny. Virgin births, talking snakes, literal hells. The more people learn about the world, the less convincing these stories become. They don't align with geology, cosmology, evolutionary biology, or basic historical evidence. Once someone starts thinking critically about one religious claim, it rarely stops there. They begin to question the whole structure, not out of hostility, but out of consistency. And if the answers they're given boil down to have faith, that often isn't enough. That phrase, just have faith, might be the most telling of all. In many ways, it's an admission. It says, we don't have evidence, we don't have clarity, but believe anyway. And more people today are saying, no thank you. Belief without evidence is no longer a virtue for them, it's a liability. They're willing to live with uncertainty, to say, I don't know, rather than insert a deity into the gap. That's not cynicism, that's intellectual honesty. But it's not just about individuals becoming less religious. It's also about societies becoming more pluralistic. In a globalized world, people are exposed to different beliefs, cultures, and traditions. That exposure weakens the idea that any one religion has a monopoly on truth. You might grow up thinking your religion is the only true one until you meet someone who believes just as deeply in a completely different system, and that encounter forces a reckoning. Either they're wrong or you are. Or, more radically, maybe you're both working with human constructs that reflect culture more than truth. That realization doesn't always lead to disbelief right away, but it plants a seed, and once that seed grows, it's hard to unsee. Another under-discussed point, the decline in metaphysical fear. For most of history, religion held people in place by threatening punishment, not just in life, but forever. Eternal damnation was a powerful deterrent, but as belief in hell declines, so does the grip of religion itself. Many people who were once terrified of punishment after death now see those ideas for what they are: control mechanisms, tools created to regulate behavior, not eternal realities. And when that fear disappears, so does the need to conform. In a way, the rise of irreligion isn't a rejection of the sacred, it's a redefinition of it. People still feel awe, they still seek transcendence, but they're finding it in nature, in art, in science, in human connection, not in ancient texts or rituals. Looking through a telescope at a distant galaxy, holding a newborn child, listening to a piece of music that makes you cry for reasons you can't explain. These are moments that feel spiritual, but they don't require belief in the supernatural. They require attention, presence, and a willingness to feel deeply. This is a key difference. Religion often tells people what to feel, what to think, what to be. A secular mindset invites people to find those answers for themselves, not through obedience, but through inquiry. And maybe that's why the shift is irreversible. Once people get a taste of that freedom to ask, to explore, to doubt, they don't want to go back. Not because they're rebellious, but because they've experienced something more honest. That honesty, that commitment to living without pretending, might be the quiet engine behind the rise of irreligion today. Of course, not everyone who leaves religion arrives at the same destination. Some turn to philosophy, some to science. Others don't label it at all, they just live, present, grounded, open. That's part of the point. The absence of religion doesn't create a void, it creates space. And in that space, people are free to ask better questions. Not, what does this ancient verse mean, but how can we reduce suffering? Not, what happens after we die, but what makes life meaningful now? The questions shift from cosmic to concrete, from speculative to actionable, from fear-driven to value-driven, and the answers become more human, not handed down from authority, but shaped through dialogue, experience, and evidence. This change doesn't mean people suddenly become perfect or unified. Human nature remains what it is, complex, flawed, full of contradictions. But the conversation changes. The goal is no longer to defend a belief system. It's to understand ourselves and each other more clearly. Even rituals are being reimagined. Weddings, funerals, holidays. These once relied heavily on religious symbols. Now, many people mark these moments with personal meaning, not doctrine. A funeral might focus on the person's life, not where their soul has gone. A wedding might celebrate love without invoking vows to a deity. These moments are no less sacred, they're just more sincere. And when people do feel the need for something larger than themselves, something transcendent, they're finding it in ways that are experiential, not theological. Meditation, stargazing, volunteering, learning. These aren't new religions. They're just ways of being fully alive without needing a divine blueprint. One of the most important effects of this shift is empathy. When you remove the idea that some people are chosen and others are lost, it becomes easier to see everyone as equally human. There's no us versus them in the cosmic sense, just fellow travelers on the same uncertain road. That mindset encourages humility, not dogma. It lets people hold their values without insisting they're absolute. It makes room for pluralism, complexity, and change. And it reduces the need to convert, control, or condemn. That doesn't mean religion has no place in the world anymore. It still offers comfort to many. It still provides identity, story, and structure. But its claim to exclusive truth, to moral authority, to metaphysical certainty, is no longer going unchallenged. And that challenge is what's driving the global shift. As long as people are free to question, to learn, to explore, religion will no longer be inevitable. It will be optional. And more people are opting out, not out of anger or pain or pride, but because they've found something that feels more honest, more flexible, more connected to the world as it actually is. They've seen that morality doesn't require mythology, that meaning doesn't require mandates, that life, even with its uncertainty, its chaos, its lack of ultimate answers, can still be deeply fulfilling. And they're right, because the search for truth doesn't end with an answer. It begins with a question, and when people are free to ask their own, to follow reason wherever it leads, something shifts. Not loudly, not all at once, but steadily, like a tide. That tide is still rising, quietly, globally, irrevocably. And maybe that's not a crisis, maybe it's not a collapse, maybe it's just growing up. Not in the dismissive sense, not with condescension, but in the human sense. Learning to live with nuance, to ask better questions, to let go of stories that no longer serve, and to build something more real in their place. Not because they have to, but because they can. Because once the world stops being divided into saved and damned, chosen and forsaken, holy and fallen, what's left is something more true. It's just people trying, thinking, living, and maybe, for the first time in a long time, doing it on their own terms.